In most species, the mother is known for her innate nature to fiercely protect her children against all dangers. What happens when a mother goes against this nature and commits the ultimate betrayal? Hi, I'm Cam.
And I'm Dev.
And you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends exchange stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So today, Dev, I'm going to be telling you about the case of Ámbar Cornejo Llanos, which took place in Chile. Have you heard of this case before?
Absolutely not. With 100% certainty, I have not.
Well, it's another case that you'll be very familiar with by the end of today's episode. But before we get into that, what you drinking, friend?
So, I am drinking another brown sugar boba milk tea because your girl had a craving today. I have been on a weight loss journey for the last few months, and I hit a big milestone for myself today. And I'm allowing myself to give into my craving. Thank you, friend. Thank you. Cam already knows, but thank you, friend.
Snap, snap, snaps, claps.
Period. I'm allowing myself to give into my cravings, which was my brown sugar boba milk tea. So that's what I have today. What are you drinking, friend?
I am drinking a Dev-inspired drink, which is a mixture of like a citrus-based fruity coconut milk mix, some rum, and some lemon juice. So I'm basically giving pina colada vibes.
Period.
So, like I said, today we will be covering the murder of Ámbar Cornejo Llanos. And before I get into her case, I do want to extend several trigger warnings for sexual assault of a child, murder of a child, parental neglect, domestic violence, and a suicide attempt. As we go through the story and I get to those places in the story where I'm going to be going into detail, I will definitely give another warning right ahead of those sections so that if you are sensitive to those topics, you will definitely know ahead of time, and I'll let you know how far ahead in the episode to skip. So getting into the background, Ámbar was born on February 14th, 2004 in Villa Alemana, Chile, to her parents, Denise and Ulises Cornejo. As a teenager, she was described by her friends as someone who was just very friendly and happy. And I'm about to list off all of the things that she loved. She loved singing, dancing, animals, cooking for her friends, trying out different hairstyles, experimenting with makeup, and she loved Rihanna. And I'm like, girl, me too to all of those.
Hello.
Especially Rihanna. And I also want to emphasize Ámbar's friendly nature. She would go out of her way to brighten the days of her friends, despite what was happening in her own life. And I say that because by the age of 16, Ámbar had experienced a lot of hardship, much more than any child should have to. Her father, Ulises, left shortly after she was born and was absent from her life for the first 5 years. And since Ulises was gone, her mother, Denise, moved on and began a relationship with a man named Juan Carlos Perez. So Juan Carlos and Denise actually knew each other from before Ámbar was even born, and they had rekindled their relationship after Denise and Ulises separated. However, the whole time they were together, they had this toxic on and off relationship. Juan and Denise ended up having their first child together in 2006, just a couple years after Ámbar was born. And around 2007 to 2008, they ended up having another child, but he died at 4 months due to malnourishment. The loss of her child led Denise into a heavy depression, which resulted in heavy drinking and her being even more neglectful of her two children, which I find ironic because neglect is what led to the death of her other child.
Exactly. How is it that your response to being neglectful is to be more neglectful?
Yeah, I'm gonna just let you know now, Dev, many of the things that Denise does do not make sense. So the school ended up getting involved because they noticed that Amber and her brother were not being taken care of at home. So they actually requested that Amber and her brother be placed in an institution for minors for a year. And it seems like this was meant to give Denise time to get herself together because after that year, they were released back into her custody in 2009. And what I couldn't find was whether there was any formal check to see if she had actually improved, or once that year was up, they just were like, okay, here you go. We think that you're better.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, because my immediate question was, based on what? Based on what information do you have that has given her the right to have her children back? Based on
Right.
what?
Yeah, I would hope that at the very least, someone came and spoke with her, reviewed the home, made sure everything looked good, but I couldn't confirm that. So, also in 2009, Denise and Juan ended up breaking things off, but they would maintain communication due to the child that they shared together. And in the same year, Ulysses, Amber's father, showed back up and said that he wanted to be present in Amber's life again. And at this time, Amber and her father actually ended up getting pretty close. Once he came back, Amber would go to spend the summer and winter breaks with her father, and they would communicate almost every day. It seemed like Ulysses was really trying to make up for the time that he had lost when he left his family. So, trigger warning for mention of sexual assault here. If you do not want to hear this, I would skip ahead about 45 seconds to a minute. So in 2012, at the age of 8, Amber told her teachers that a friend of hers had been sexually assaulted. The teachers thanked her for telling them and told her that they would contact that friend's family. But when they asked for this friend's name, Amber confessed that she was the one who had been assaulted. And the teachers took her to the police so that she could make a report. And this is when she explained to them that Juan, her mother's ex-boyfriend and the father of her brother, would sexually assault her whenever she, her mom, and her brother would go to visit him. When her mom, Denise, found out about this, she cut off all communication with Juan, and he ended up being sentenced to 3 years in prison. After he got out, he had to report to the police every 3 months and keep them updated with his address information. He also had to pay the cost of his trial, and he was prohibited from contacting Amber or Denise. And I just want to applaud Amber for being so brave at such a young age, because, I mean, not only was she so young, but her family was financially dependent on Juan. So I can only imagine how scary that must have been for an 8-year-old.
Absolutely. I too want to salute all the bravery in the world for this little girl. And I also, though I feel like I will regret saying this by the end of the episode, I do also want to give credit to Denise for taking the step to cut him off, even though she was financially dependent on him, and prioritizing your children. Because, again, I feel I may regret saying the statement, but far too often, mothers will choose their new boyfriend over the well being of their children. And I am at least happy in this one instance that the child was put first. But my main point being that it is always so important to put your children first in that scenario. And I respect that she put her child first and cut off communication with this man. But per usual, pedophiles and child molesters get these incredibly short sentences that do not do anything. You have completely altered the entire life of a child and you got 3 years in prison. That's nothing. In the grand scheme of life, 3 years in prison isn't anything. And I hate that, because all too often a child's life is changed forever and the person who did it to them gets a slap on the wrist.
Right. And then they get out and then they continue to do that to more people.
Exactly. And obviously my issue is with the justice system that doesn't hold these people accountable, not with victims and survivors who come forward and talk about it.
Yeah. And I also feel like Amber felt comfortable coming forward after she saw how the teachers responded when she told them that this happened to a friend. I feel like she said it happened to a friend to see how they would respond. And if they were mad at that friend, she wouldn't have told them. But since they were like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling us, tell us this friend's name, that's when she felt comfortable saying, okay, this actually happened to me. I am the one who needs support and help.
Right. And that's another example of like why it's so important to, if somebody comes to you with their story, to not do all these prying questions and not question what they're saying to you. Just be like, okay, thank you for telling me. How can I help you? How can I assist with you? Don't question them. Don't be like, oh, well, where were you and what was going on and what was the vibes and what. You don't need to ask a bunch of questions. The only question you should ask is, how do you need my help? Be there for that person, because clearly if they're coming to you with this information, there is a deep-seated trust in you as a person. They trust you fully if they come forward to you with this information. So also kudos to her teachers for responding appropriately.
So while all of this was going on with Juan's trial and all of that, Amber's father, Ulysses, was given temporary custody of her by the court. However, since Denise was compliant with the court's orders and did not contact Juan, Amber was returned to Denise's custody after a few months. By this point, Ulysses knew that Denise was not a good mother and was not caring for Amber and her son like she should, and he actually wanted to push for Amber to live with him full time. When Denise found out about this, she stopped allowing Amber to visit him and tried to make her mad at her dad by talking down on him and saying that he was just trying to separate their family. And like I said, even though he wasn't present for the beginning of her life, it did seem like Ulysses was trying to make up for this and give Amber the life that he knew she deserved.
Exactly. And again, I will criticize you for exiting this child's life. I will always criticize you for doing that. You should never do that to a child. But also, in that same vein of criticism, if you as a parent are talking down about another parent to your child, you are also a problem. Do not put children in the mess that you feel with your ex-significant other. It is inappropriate. It is inappropriate. It is manipulative. It is not okay under any circumstances. Do not do that. Like, I hate when I hear stories about that, of like people poisoning their children to hate another parent just because they have some ill will towards that parent. It's so immature and evil. I actually feel like it's evil.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, why are you harming that child's relationship with their parent because things didn't go the way that you want to? It's one thing if that parent is actually evil and messed up and you want that child to know the truth. But it's another thing if you're telling them lies, because children are very impressionable. But despite the fact that he wasn't able to see Amber as much as he would like to, Ulysses still sent her money. But for some reason, likely Amber's age, this money had to go through Denise. So Amber would actually have to tell her dad to tell her when he would send the money, because her mom would sometimes take her money and spend it on frivolous things without paying Amber back. And to make matters worse, it wasn't like this was just like Amber spending money. And even if it would still be hers. Ulysses was sending her this money for food and basic necessities because he did not believe Denise was capable of providing that.
And quite frankly, you prove his point by spending her money on frivolous things. He is 100% right to feel that way. And yet you try to poison his child against him.
Right. So for reasons like this and others, Amber's relationship with her mother would deteriorate over the next couple of years. One of her friends witnessed an event where Amber and her mother were arguing, and she saw Denise move to hit Amber. But fortunately, she and her friend were able to run to her room and shut the door and hide. But Denise ended up hitting and breaking the door. I think the situation resolved itself before anyone could be harmed any further, but that's just an example of the kinds of things that Denise was capable doing in front of company. And based on other testimony from Amber's friends, this seemed like a constant thing. And when they would ask Amber why she doesn't defend herself, she would say, "Oh, she's my mother and, she gave birth to me, so I have to respect her." And Amber wouldn't even put her hands on her in defense. And it's wild to me that a child knew more about respect than a grown woman.
Hello. But all too often, parents, for some reason, think that because they gave birth to you when you had no decision on you being here or not, that allows them to put their hands on you, that allows them to treat you like crap, and then you as the child need to give them all this respect when they give you none. That is very common, and it sickens me. Respect is earned. I don't care who you are. And if you're a terrible person to me, I don't care if you are my parent, my grandparent, my great aunt twice removed. I don't give a damn. I will respect you when you show me respect. And also, it is terrifying that you are so comfortable abusing your children that you do it in front of company. God only knows what hell you put these children through when nobody is home. If you're that comfortable breaking down a door with somebody else's child in a home, you're crazy. You are actually crazy.
Exactly. And around 2013 to 2014, Denise started to see another man named Manuel Garcia, who was also her landlord. And this apparently was not a formal relationship. They were essentially engaged in a casual relationship. But because of the nature of their relationship, Manuel was often in Denise's apartment and was often around her children. And since he was the landlord, he also had access to the whole building. I'm going to extend another trigger warning here for mentions of creepy ass men that don't know how to stay away from children. Skip forward like a minute or so. So whenever Amber would shower, Manuel would go to a part of the building where he could see inside of the bathroom and watch her. At one point, Amber saw him and told her mom. And instead of being a good protective mother, Denise basically brushed her off and told Amber and her brother not to shower unless she was home. Because, yes, that will stop it. And on top of this is the start of when Denise would start getting mad at Amber for Denise's bad taste in men. Like, instead of being like, maybe I should date men who aren't creepy, she's getting mad at the child who is the victim.
I knew I was going to be disappointed in Denise, but I didn't realize it was going to be this quickly.
It goes downhill from here, girl.
I feel it. I feel it going downhill fast, friend.
So we're going to skip forward to 2019, when Denise began dating a man named Hugo Bustamante. And their relationship moved extremely quickly in a way that made Amber very uncomfortable. They moved in together shortly after they started dating. And to Amber, this is seeming like it's coming from out of nowhere. On top of this, she knows that her mother does not have good taste in men, and she knows that her mother's bad taste in men usually means something bad is going to happen for her. So one day when she was at school, she was venting to her friend and telling her about how much she disliked her mom's new boyfriend and was wary of the situation. She would feel like he was looking at her inappropriately. And when she told her friend his name, her friend was like, "Wait, that name sounds familiar." So they decide to look him up. And they soon discover why his name sounded familiar. It was because Hugo Bustamante had been convicted of killing his girlfriend, Veronica Vasquez, and her 9-year-old son, Oñejo, nearly 20 years prior in 2005. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this case in the interest of time, but I will speak about what Amber would have read when she looked Hugo up. So, at the time that Hugo and Veronica met, Veronica was a single mother to her young son, Oñejo, and At this point, Hugo had had a bit of a past where he'd gone to prison for robbery. He had a child with an ex-girlfriend that he wasn't really in contact with, but it seemed like after prison, he turned over a new leaf. And their relationship seemed to go well at first. Veronica felt like she found a great man and father figure for her son. But shortly into their relationship, Hugo began asking for money for home improvements. And at first, Veronica would oblige because she viewed it as an investment into their joint future. But after a while, Veronica got fed up. Hugo would never pay her back, and she felt taken advantage of. On top of this, Hugo had become increasingly abusive, and Veronica was no longer happy in their relationship. Again, I'm going to extend a trigger warning for graphic description of a murder. If you would not like to hear this, I would skip forward about 1 to 2 minutes. So the next time Hugo asked her for money, Veronica told him no, and this seemed to set him off. He beat Veronica with a bat and strangled her. And when her son came out and saw what was happening, Hugo strangled him too. There were other things that he did, but I am not going to go into that. He placed their bodies into metal barrels and ransacked the house to look for Veronica's money. After he found her money, he left the house for a few days and spent the money on sex workers, drugs, and alcohol. He filled the barrels with water, lime, and plaster to try and hide the smell, but of course, the barrels started to smell by the time he got back. He ended up burying them in the backyard of another house that he'd bought, and he'd asked his dad to help him dig the hole and asked some movers to help him move the barrels. None of these people were aware of what was actually inside of these. He told them that he worked in the French fry industry and that the barrels contained chemicals. Despite all of Hugo's efforts, the barrels started to smell, and when the police arrived, he confessed everything to them. Hugo was sentenced to 27 years in prison and was supposed to be there until 2032. However, when he was up for parole around 10 years later in 2016, the people in the prison actually argued against his release, stating that he was not ready to re-enter into society. In 2006, he'd actually done an interview for a TV show, and when he was asked whether he would kill again, he said, quote, "I have thought about it and I don't have the answer. I can't say it's impossible that I will experience a similar situation. I am not the owner of destiny." And we'll include a link to that actual interview. It is in Spanish, but if anyone is a Spanish speaker and is interested in hearing that, we will include that link. So like I said, for many reasons, the people in the prison argued against his release, but at the time, there was a law in Chile that stated that inmates sentenced to more than 20 years would be eligible for parole in 10 years if they had great behavior in prison and had made steps to better themselves. And because Hugo technically met all of these criteria, he was allowed to leave in 2016. I will say many people came against the judge for this. However, even after she was sanctioned and this was looked into, she kept her position because this really was a case of she had to follow this law. They even said this is a flawed law, but it was one of those cases where if they didn't follow the law, it would be judicial negligence. Fortunately, this law has since been updated to make it more difficult for prisoners to be granted parole. So this is all of the things that Ámbar would have seen when she looked up Hugo Bustamante. Imagine already being uneasy around this man and reading this about him. Ámbar was not only afraid for herself, but also for her brother and her mom.
I will never understand how the justice system allows for a person who not only murdered somebody, but to strangle somebody to death takes a very long time. I've talked about it on this podcast before. It can take anywhere from 5 to 12 minutes to strangle someone to death, depending on how much they're fighting you. It is an extremely cruel way to kill somebody because you literally see the life drain out of their body. And not only did you do it once, you then turn around and did it to a child. And you, as somebody who is capable of strangling a child to death, is allowed to walk the streets, is allowed to leave prison, is allowed to ever rejoin society. I love how they tried to be like, oh, he's not ready to rejoin society now. No, he's not ready to rejoin society ever. There are some people who just deserve to be buried under the jail. And in my opinion, anybody who strangles a child to death deserves to be buried under a jail. I don't care the circumstances at all. There is no circumstances where you could ever tell me that somebody who committed a heinous crime against a child doesn't deserve to die in prison.
And I especially think that it's messed up that the law at that time didn't even allow for exceptions.
Right.
You have the people of the prison saying, we don't think this person should be released. Also, this was a very famous case in Chile. So even when the judges were looking at it, they were like, are we sure we should do this? And they essentially came to the conclusion that there was no other option for them. If there was another option, I'm sure they would have taken it. And I'm glad that the law has been updated now, but it's sad that it took this happening for it to get updated.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I was about to say, that it's so crazy to me that laws are made and then bad things happen as a result of the law. And now all of a sudden we have to get that fixed. Was there nobody who had the foresight to think that, oh, if it's 20 years or more, they should be released after 10 years? Are we not thinking about violent crimes? Are we not thinking about murder? Are we not thinking about other heinous acts that people commit that, you know what, you might need to go sit in prison for 20 years for? You might actually just need to go sit in the corner and stay there. Why was there seemingly no forethought for that at all? I could completely understand this law for like non-violent crimes. I could completely understand like, oh, if you were a good prisoner and you have more than maybe 5 years for a non-violent crime, then I'm thinking like distribution of drugs, stuff like that, right? You can get looked at for parole after a year or two because you're not violent. You're not putting anybody's life in danger. That makes perfect sense. But people who have taken people off of this earth do not get that courtesy. I can't believe this was even a law to begin with.
Right. The fact that he not only murdered a mother and her son, these were two people that loved him. Even if Veronica was not in love with him anymore, I am sure she still had love for him.
Exactly. And it's especially cruel. You killed this woman with her son in her house. You not only took this little boy's life, but you scarred him before you did it. Again, I am fearful of people who have this mentality and concept. How could you do that? How could you do that?
And that's what many people were thinking. Even when Hugo had gotten released, people in the community did not want him there. They were like, okay, you might seem nice when we're out on our lawns, but I know what you did, and you're still creepy. So when Ámbar told her mother about Hugo and his past, they actually got into a fight. And Denise told Ámbar that everyone deserves a second chance, and she shouldn't judge him without knowing him. Mind you, Denise did not know him that well either.
I'm about to say, girl, you don't know him. You're giving him a second chance without knowing him. If anybody believes in a second chance, it is me. I very much believe in second chances. I very much believe that people can change. But I do not believe that murderers can change. I do not believe people who commit crimes against children can change. I do not believe those people can change. I believe that you are the way you are. And especially considering it seems like you have no remorse for what you did, I definitely don't think you can change.
You literally said you don't know if you would kill again, which means you probably will.
Which means you probably will. I don't understand how you got out of prison. I don't understand how you got out of prison.
Yeah. So since Denise was not going to do anything, Ámbar wrote a letter to the manager of the apartment building stating that she did not want Hugo allowed on the premises since he was a, quote, psychopathic murderer that could cause harm to her family. End quote. This note somehow got around the rest of the apartment, and they basically were like, all right, if Denise not going to kick him out, all y'all can go. And Denise, Hugo, and her son ended up moving to a house that Hugo owned. And I say Denise, Hugo, and her son because Denise basically left Ámbar in that apartment with about $20.
Of course she did. Of course she did. Because we pick a psychopathic murderer over our child. Of course, the psychopathic murderer is way more important than our child. And of course, we take the psychopathic murderer who murdered a woman and her son to go live with a woman and her son. Of course we do that.
Exactly. And mind you, Ámbar is 16 at this point. She is 16 years old. And she is doing things like writing a letter to the manager of her apartment building because she knows that her mother is not capable of making the right decisions. Her mother is not capable of protecting her. So she has to become the adult in this scenario. And there are so many instances where Ámbar has had to become the adult and she is so young.
Exactly. Stripping her of her childhood.
So Ámbar stayed in the apartment for about a week until she started reaching out to friends to see if she could stay with them. And she was basically couch surfing because she is 16. So all of her other 16-year-old friends are living with their families, and there just wasn't really room for her to stay with anybody long term. And she actually didn't tell her father about all of the stuff that was going on because her father lived in the northern part of Chile, like hours away, and she didn't want to leave her brother alone with Hugo. She was also afraid for her mother, despite the fact that Denise had abandoned her. So she downplayed the situation to her father because she knew that if he knew the truth, he would come and get her. But fortunately, Ámbar actually ended up living with a woman named Maritza, who was the daughter of Manuel. Despite Ámbar's experience with Manuel, she actually had a strong relationship with Maritza, who apparently was unaware of what her father had done. Maritza was about the same age as Ámbar's mother, Denise, and she was really like a mother figure to Ámbar, the mother that she'd never had. Ámbar even referred to her as her aunt. Those close to Ámbar said that Maritza gave her a lot of love and support, and it seemed like she was able to give Ámbar the stability that she missed when she was with Denise. While staying with her, Ámbar would play with Maritza's kids, and she just seemed really happy. She would vent to Maritza and her friends that she was just so frustrated with her mom and tired of her mom choosing these men over her. And I mean, as you can imagine, due to all of this stress, Ámbar was not doing great in school. She ended up having to repeat a grade. And when teachers tried to contact Denise to meet and talk about Ámbar's performance, Denise would talk to them aggressively, yell at them, and basically ignore their request to meet. And as she was now living with Hugo, Denise had begun drinking more and basically started to let herself go. But around July 2020, things had started to look up for Ámbar. She was still living with Maritza and enjoying the support of Maritza and her friends. Due to quarantine, she began focusing more on her health and was doing a lot of home workouts. So all of this brings us to July 29th, 2020. Around 9 a.m., Ámbar got a call from her mom asking her to come to Hugo's house to pick up the monthly allowance that her father sent her. Ámbar told Maritza that she was going to pick up the money and would be right back. Hugo's house was only a few blocks away from where she lived. And Ámbar typically would not go inside Hugo's house and actually would wait outside the door for her mom to give her the money. But after Ámbar had not arrived home after 3 hours and was not answering her phone, Maritza got concerned. She tried to call Denise to see if she knew where Ámbar was, but Denise basically didn't care and hung up the phone on her. Soon after this, Maritza called the police and a search for Ámbar was launched. Maritza knew that Ámbar would not have run away because, one, she only had her cell phone and didn't pack any clothes with her, and two, it just would have been so out of character for her. That is not the kind of person that Ámbar was. And unfortunately, Ulises did not find out that Ámbar was missing until one of his friends called him and told him. This was also the same time that he learned the truth about Denise's boyfriend, Hugo. And after hearing this, Ulysses makes his way down to the town where Ámbar lives. And he tries to get in contact with Denise to coordinate their search efforts for their daughter and also see what she knows about the situation. But Denise is brushing him off. She's not telling him where Hugo's house is, where she's living, and is basically just ignoring him. She wasn't only brushing Ulysses off, she also wasn't really being helpful to Maritza or the police. But despite Denise's inaction, there was a huge search effort going on for Ámbar. One man actually came forward and said that he saw Ámbar that morning walking along the road and crying. And people were very critical of him for not stopping and, offering help. But apparently at this time, violence against women was happening all over Chile. And he said that the reason he didn't stop to help her was because he actually didn't want to come off as suspicious. I guess that violence against women was so common that if you saw women in distress and you went to help her, you could potentially be looked at as a suspect for anything that happened to her. Another neighbor also said that they saw Ámbar go inside her mother's house, but never saw her leave. Another camera caught her walking towards her mother's house, but never caught her leaving. At this point, police knew that the last people to see Ámbar alive were Hugo and Denise. Maritza and other members of the search party ended up going to Hugo's house to confront him about this. He denied knowing anything about Ámbar and came off as friendly. He said, "You can come inside my house and look inside if you want to." So they did just that. The search party went inside his house, along with the police and their dogs, and they were calling out Ámbar's name, but they were unable to find anything. While this was going on, Hugo made an interesting comment to Maritza. He basically said that if he had a body in his house, they would be able to smell it. And don't you think that a body that's been in here for 2 days would smell? And Maritza's thinking, no one said anything about a body. We all still believe that Ámbar is alive. Got yourself.
I was just about to say, you would know. You would know exactly what a body smells like after 2 days.
Exactly. And of course, while everyone is looking for Ámbar, Denise is not even helping. She and Hugo were sitting outside drinking beers. One of Ámbar's friends even recorded a call to Denise where she asked her what happened. And Denise said Ámbar came to get the money from her and left. That's it. So with all of these things that are not adding up, Ámbar's friends and those in the community start calling for a deeper investigation into Denise and Hugo. They knew that Ámbar would not vanish on her own like that. And Maritza also gave interviews explaining how afraid and heartbroken she was because she couldn't find Ámbar. This is Maritza, the person who is not even related to Ámbar by blood. She is doing more for her than her own mother. So 5 days after Ámbar was last seen, Hugo and Denise end up fleeing the area. This only increased the attention and focus on them, and they weren't able to get far because on August 6th, a couple days after they fled, they were found at a camping ground trying to find somewhere to hide. They were brought in for questioning that same day, and after they brought her in, Denise told police that she would tell them everything. She said that she knew what happened to Ámbar, but had been afraid to come forward because Hugo threatened to harm her, her son, and her parents if she said anything. She also said that Hugo forced her to run away with him after the search party confronted them. She told police that Hugo had murdered Ámbar and hidden her body in a ditch in the middle of the home. At this point, police believed her story and released Denise since they just considered her a witness.
No. I cared more for the 45 seconds that my dog was missing than she cared about the fact that her daughter was missing for weeks. No.
Her daughter wasn't missing to her, though. She knew exactly where she was.
You're correct. You're exactly correct. Of course she's not concerned. She knows what happened. Everybody else is concerned because they don't. And the thing I kept thinking as you kept telling me the story was, stop making it so obvious that you did it. I would really appreciate it if you could stop making it so blatantly obvious that you did it.
At least pretend to care.
At least pretend to care. At least put on the show. At least show up to the scene screaming and crying and pretending. But when you make it so obvious, to me, that's even scarier than the people who pretend to be distraught.
So at the same time, police were looking at Hugo's phone and his other belongings. Hugo, unlike Denise, had chosen to remain silent. But when they looked at his phone, they found a treasure trove of disturbing searches. Between July 20th to the 28th, he'd searched things like price of electric weapons, using chloroform to sleep, Chinese bamboo torture, using ether to put people to sleep, and how to change your first and last name. All of these searches indicated that he was planning a crime. Police also got a warrant to search Hugo's home for Ámbar's body. And just another trigger warning here for a graphic description of a crime scene. I would skip forward about 30 seconds to 1 minute. So when police searched Hugo's home and they went into the living room where Denise had directed them, they found Ámbar's body buried underneath the living room of the home. She had been cut into multiple pieces and placed in multiple coolers. After Ámbar's body was discovered, people took to the street screaming, "Justice for Ámbar." They were making noise by banging on pots and pans and screaming her name. Not only were they mad about what had happened to her, but also how she was found. Her body was taken to the medical examiner for an autopsy, and as she was being transported from Hugo's house to the medical examiner, people followed the car in silence with their phone lights on as a way to pay their respects. Because like I said, femicide is a big problem in Chile. Even though Chile has an overall low homicide rate, there are a lot of violent crimes against women. And in 2010, the Chilean legislature actually defined femicide, which helped with the prosecution of perpetrators, but it still limited the application of the femicide charge to people who had currently or previously lived with the victim. This 2010 law also made the penalty for femicide harsher than the penalties for homicide. And while this was a step in the right direction, this was still a problem that was prevalent throughout the entire country. People were screaming and protesting in the streets because it wasn't just Ámbar. It was them. It was their sister. It was their mother. It was their daughter. Hugo was arrested and placed in preventative prison as police awaited more results from the medical examiner. Even though police had let Denise go, the community wasn't done with her. They didn't believe that she was the victim in this situation, and they were mad that she wasn't being investigated more. Denise was getting so much pressure and hate from the community that she tried to take her own life. After this, she got put into a confidential psychiatric ward under witness protection. Police refused to disclose her location for fear of how the community would retaliate. And of course, this only made the community even more mad.
Quite frankly, I do not feel bad for you that suddenly, when you are being called out for your bad behavior, your mental health has taken a nosedive. I do not feel bad for her because she was perfectly comfortable walking over her child's dismembered body in her house. I don't feel sorry for you. I don't.
And I love that her mental health only took a dive when people were coming after her. Your mental health was fine when your daughter was dead, when your daughter was buried underneath the house you were living in.
And another thing, the selfishness of people will never cease to amaze and disappoint me. There is no way in hell I would ever allow a man to kill my child, me know about it, and I'm sure you're going to get into this, but I already know that she's a lot more guilty than she likes to act like she is because of who she is. She's never cared about this child. She has never loved this child the way that this child was supposed to be loved. She's never done that. So I'm sure it was no sweat off your back if he did ask you to run away with him. You didn't care. You didn't feel bad. So of course you're willing to run away. You don't care. And it goes back to something that you said during Brooklyn's episode of now that you're being called out, now that you've made the decision to do something irreparable, now you're so scared. Now you need help. Now you want people to feel bad for you. But you had none of that before you allowed that murder to take place. Because also, I'm speaking for the hypothetical children that I don't even have. If somebody tried to harm my children, I would be buried first before I ever let somebody commit a crime against my unborn children. You would literally have to harm my children over my dead body. And for you to be a parent and not have that, to not have that innate built-in desire to love and protect your child, there is something seriously wrong with you.
And I also feel like for you to be a human and not have that innate desire, because I feel the same way about children that I don't know.
Exactly.
Children are so vulnerable. We as adults have an obligation to protect them, regardless of if it's your child or not.
Exactly.
But Denise would not escape her culpability for long. On September 24th, 2020, Denise was arrested and placed in preventative prison for the charge of arranging and witnessing crimes of sexual assault with homicide. This arrest was made based on evidence surfaced during the investigation of Hugo. Police uncovered photos, surveillance footage, witness statements, and cell phone data that proved Denise was involved. So we're going to skip forward to 2021. On June 14th, the hearing for the preparation of the oral trial took place. In this hearing, there were 54 witnesses, 113 documents, and 30 expert reports covering DNA, psychological, and chemical evidence. The prosecution was requesting life in prison. I did some digging into the Chilean legal system, and I was unable to find specifics about how the hearing for the preparation of the oral trial connects to the oral trial. But what I essentially found is that the oral trial is the bigger trial that takes place where the prosecutor and defense are arguing in front of a judge. Chilean courts don't really have a jury of peers. You have a set of judges that are overseeing a case. And pretty much any decision they make after the oral trial is pretty final. There is an appeals process, but it is much harder to actually get an appeal. Nothing like what we see here in the US legal system. And Devin, this is a bright point in this story. While in prison, Denise was being bullied and harassed by other inmates who despised her for killing her daughter. Many women there were mothers themselves who would do anything to be with their own children, who dreamed of the day that they would get out and be able to see their children again. Denise and her cellmate especially fought all the time, and her cellmate told her that she would make Denise's life hell and would never let her sleep again for what she did. Unfortunately, due to those threats, Denise was moved to a separate area as she awaited her trial.
I'm not going to lie. I might be a little bit of a sick person myself because that really did make me very happy. I probably shouldn't have smiled as much as I did when you made that statement, but oh well. Oh well, I don't care. This woman is responsible for her child's death. I don't care what happens to her.
And I think that is exactly what she deserved.
Hello.
She doesn't deserve to sleep. She does not deserve a moment of joy because the depravity that she exhibited. Honestly, there isn't a punishment that can be doled out by the justice system that she actually deserves.
Hello.
So I'm fine with a little prison justice.
Oh, you know we love street justice around here. We love a little street justice. Responsibly. Don't get your butt sent to jail doing street justice. But responsible street justice we stand for in this household.
So on October 26, 2021, the oral trial took place and prosecutors laid out what they believed happened. While I believe Hugo and Denise were being tried together for this trial, I'm not exactly sure. However, I do know that their sentencing took place at one time. I do, again, want to extend a trigger warning for a graphic description as I am about to get into the events that took place on July 29th, 2020. I would skip forward about 2 to 3 minutes. However, we will definitely give the exact timestamps for this portion of the episode. So, as we know, Denise called Ámbar around 9 a.m. to ask her to pick up the money that her father had left her. Before Ámbar arrived, Denise made her 14-year-old son go pick something up at the school so that there would be no witnesses. When Ámbar arrived, Denise insisted that Ámbar come inside the house to get the money. It's unclear how she was able to actually convince Ámbar to come inside the house, since Ámbar actually made a point of not stepping a foot inside of Hugo's house. However, she was able to convince her to come inside. Once Ámbar was inside, Denise and Hugo immobilized Ámbar somehow, and Hugo sexually assaulted her. However, Denise's son came back from school earlier than expected. According to the son, he arrived back home around 9:30 a.m., and Denise came outside the house and told him that they needed to go back to the old apartment ASAP because she'd just gotten a call that someone was breaking in. However, the son needed to go to the bathroom really bad and was like, "Okay, we can go, but I just need to go inside for a couple minutes so I can use the bathroom." Denise refused to let him inside, and Hugo was actually pushing the door from the other side to keep him from going inside the house. While Denise was stalling her son, Hugo moved Ámbar's body to another room in the house and closed the door. Denise finally let her son in, and he said that when he was in the bathroom, he heard thumps coming from the other room. When he left the bathroom, and before he even had a chance to ask about the noise, Hugo started talking about how his mother was in the other room folding clothes. Denise's son thought this was strange, but ended up leaving the house to go with his mom to their other apartment to address this emergency. They were even caught on camera at the metro station on the way to the other apartment. And on camera, Denise looks very calm. After they left, Hugo began dismembering Ámbar's body and placing her into the coolers. While Denise was gone, she was sending Hugo messages like, quote, "I'm more calm now. I love you. Kisses." End quote. And, quote, "I hope everything comes out okay." End quote. Denise tells her son to stay in the apartment because, of course, when they get there, there is nothing wrong. And after she leaves the apartment, she goes to the store to get paraffin wax and paint. Hugo would end up using the paraffin wax on the wooden boards to seal them and prevent the search dogs from smelling Ámbar's body. After she goes to the store, Denise goes back to the house and helps Hugo finish burying her daughter's body. From 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. that night, neighbors heard spaced out sounds of equipment like hammers and drills. Denise also wrapped Ámbar's phone in foil and threw it on the roof of their home. When police recovered this, they found Denise's fingerprints on the foil surrounding Ámbar's phone. And when Maritza and the search party showed up at the house, Hugo was actually extremely nervous despite his calm demeanor. After they left, he told Denise that they had to go because the people were onto them. And in terms of motive, the prosecution argued that Denise and Hugo killed Ámbar because they saw her as an obstacle to their relationship and thought that by killing her, they could live in peace. On December 7th, 2021, the Viña del Mar Oral Criminal Court sentenced Hugo Bustamante and Denise Llanos to qualified life in prison for what they did to Ámbar. Hugo was sentenced for sexual assault with femicide, and Denise was sentenced for the crime of sexual assault with homicide. The judge stated that they'd both acted with premeditation and had agreed to sexually assault and kill her, and then proceeded to hide her body. The judge also prohibited them from receiving any prison benefits for 40 years. This meant that they would not be eligible to do things that some other prisoners could do and would be under maximum security and scrutiny from the justice system. Their sentence also included time for the abuse and sexual assault of Ámbar's little brother. The details of this case have not been shared publicly, so there's not much information on what happened or how this was uncovered. But Hugo was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the crime of statutory sexual assault, 7 years for sexual abuse of a person under 14 years of age, and 10 for the corruption of minors. Denise was sentenced to 10 years in prison for sexual abuse of a person under 14 years of age and 10 years for the corruption of minors. All of these sentences were on top of their life sentence. After their sentencing was announced, many feminist organizations celebrated in the streets because they knew that neither Denise nor Hugo would be let out of prison. And many said that even though they were happy that the system put them away, it was the same justice system that allowed this to happen in the first place.
Why? All I'm sitting here thinking is why? Why would you do this to your son? Why would you do this to your daughter? How could you set her up? You set her up. You lured her to this house knowing what was going to happen, and that's your child. How is she allegedly in the way of your relationship and she doesn't even live with you? She makes it a point to not spend a moment around you, and she's in the way of your relationship. She's not even telling her father the full extent of what you're doing and who you are, and she's in the way of your relationship? How? How is that the case? And how is it the case with your son? Your son lives with you. How is he in the way? How do you allow somebody to live under the same roof when you know they abused your child? When you know they're actively abusing your child? How do you do that? How do you allow that? How do you not care enough about your child's well-being to not prioritize their mental health, their well-being, how they're doing in life, how their life will be forever be ruined and changed based on the actions of this person that you have allowed to occupy this space? I'm going to use Ámbar's language here. A psychopathic murderer. You chose a psychopathic murderer, pedophile, child molester, and rapist over your children. What kind of woman are you? What kind of person are you? What kind of mother do you pretend to be?
Not only chose, but she became that.
Exactly. Because when you enabled him, when you encouraged him, when you knew.
She was there when he sexually assaulted her daughter. She was standing there.
You saw this happen and you felt nothing. You're just as much of a psychopath as he is.
And Dev and I have had to take many breaks during this episode because this has just made us so emotional. And I feel like one of the reasons this has made me so emotional is because I can't stop thinking about how Ámbar must have felt in her last moments. Even when her mother had abandoned her, even when her mother had shown her that she cares more about this murderer, child molester, and rapist that she's known for less time than she's known her daughter. Even when she did that, Ámbar still had the place in her heart to care about her mother. And to know that those were her last moments just hurts me so much.
Exactly. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Every child deserves a parent, but every parent does not deserve a child. And it's so sad because, again, like I've said on this podcast, children see their parents as really their first God, the one that's supposed to love them, protect them, give them everything they can, ensure their safety, ensure their well-being. That's what children look for. That's what children are supposed to have because they're innocent. They're defenseless. They can't fight in this world without a parent. And it just makes me so sad that despite knowing who her mother is, despite knowing all the mistreatment that her mother has put her through, all the dismissing her mother had done of her feelings, of her fears, her whole life, she still wanted to give her a chance. And that I feel is the epitome of every child, still reaching out and still holding out hope that their parent is going to change, that their parent is going to be better, that their parent will finally give them the love and attention that they haven't been giving them. That love and affection is still not reciprocated. Yet, for some reason that you just don't quite know, and if you have a good relationship with your parents, you're not going to understand this at all. You keep holding out hope that they're going to change, and they never do. And it's so unfortunate because as a child, you want nothing more than your parents' validation, than your parents' love, than your parents' affection. And despite never getting it, you will always reach out for that. And that's exactly what I feel like happened here. She knew her mother didn't care. She knew her mother prioritized men over her again and again and again. She knew. And yet she held out hope that one day her mother would finally act like one. And instead, she betrayed her in the worst possible way. I don't think there is a worse way for a mother to betray a child than this. Because not only did you stand there as she was assaulted, not only did you stand there as she was murdered, you tried to ensure that he would never be caught, that she would never be found, that a community couldn't have a proper burial for her. You even take away her dignity in death. You allow him to dismember her? Your child? A 16-year-old girl? You allow that? And then have the audacity to claim that your mental health is in the toilet after you got caught? Where was all this care for mental health when your child reached out to you? When your child needed you? When your child was couch surfing from friend's house to friend's house to friend's house? Where was all the care about mental health then? Or does mental health only matter when it's your mental health?
And for those people who do struggle with their relationship with their parents, we feel for you. And I think in a similar way that Maritza filled that mother role for Ámbar, your biological parents don't have to be the only parents that you have. There are many people in this world who can fill that mentorship role, who can fill that parental role. So all is not lost.
Cam is absolutely right. And I have even found in my own life that often the family you choose is more present, is more happy for you, and is more encouraging than the family you're given. And that is not to say that your given family cannot be amazing. Your given family could be lovely, could be wonderful people, and you can have a great relationship with your given family. But there is a special love that comes from your chosen family. Cam is my chosen family. To the point where I do not know where I would be in life without her.
Same girl. So before we close out today's case, I do just want to get into a few things that happened after this whole ordeal. And I'm going to start with some of the more upsetting things first so that we can end on a more positive note. So in December 2021, Manuel Garcia, who was the landlord, was actually sentenced to 14 years in prison for possessing and producing child pornography, some of which was of Ámbar. It is believed that Ámbar was not aware of this before she passed. In June of this year, 2024, it was also revealed that Hugo Bustamante confessed to 2 additional murders in 1996. He admitted to killing Elena Hinojosa and Eduardo Paez, a mother and son. In June of this year, their bodies were found buried under his home, not far from where Ámbar was found. It seems like police are still looking into this, but we do know that Hugo met Eduardo in prison and kept in touch with him afterwards, and it seems like that was their connection. Ámbar's brother is apparently living with other family who states that he is doing well and making friends at school. Ulises has stated that he regrets not fighting harder to maintain custody of Ámbar back in 2012, and he believes that had he actually fought harder, Ámbar would still be here today. And I want to end this episode by talking about Ámbar. On September 2nd, 2020, Ámbar had her funeral. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Her funeral was organized by a group called Justice for Ámbar. They said, quote, "We are here to say goodbye to our little angel, our girl Ámbar. We want to make it clear that this is not over. Our group will continue, and we want more women to join our fight." End quote. The women of Chile were sick of living in fear of being attacked solely because of their gender. And on top of this funeral, Ámbar's friends always make a social media post on the anniversary of her death and on her birthday, highlighting the light that she brought into their lives. And on February 14th, 2022, the Justice for Ámbar movement revealed a beautiful mural of Ámbar. Near this mural, there was a poster that said, "I was born to be free, not to be killed." And I think that that perfectly captures the sentiment of women in Chile. They did not feel free because they were afraid nearly every moment in their lives. In 2020, the Chilean legislature passed Gabriela's Law, which expanded the definition of femicide to anyone who commits a gender-motivated homicide of a woman, and also gave longer prison sentences to those found guilty. This made it so that people who committed femicide could not avoid the charge just because they had never lived with the victim. In 2023, the legislature passed another law that expanded protections for victims of femicide and their families, and allowed for reparations for the children affected by femicide. It also protected survivors of attempted femicide against discriminatory action by their employers for 1 year after the crime. This gave women more time to heal physically and mentally, and also gave them time to focus on participating in the justice system, be that engaging in interviews with the police and helping put their attackers behind bars. It seemed like what would happen before is that some women were afraid of losing their jobs because of the time that they had to spend actually participating in this legal process. And as I said before, these are steps in the right direction, but this is still a problem across the world. Women in so many places live in fear. And I'll end the story on just a bit of a light note. So, Dev, I was watching Shits and Gigs podcast last week, and the question they started out with was, "Ladies, what would you do if there were no men on Earth for 1 day?" And so many of the responses were, "Walk around at night with my headphones in." And I feel like that is just such an apt representation of how pervasive this sentiment and the fear is among women. And of course, it is more dangerous in some places than others. But I feel that regardless of where we are, we could be in the place that's been deemed the safest place on earth, and we still feel fear. And that is the end of our story.
To pick up on that note, I quite enjoy the Shits and Gigs podcast. I find them to be hilarious. And one of the things I actually really love is when they do questionnaires like that, they also are very empathetic. They're like, "Wow, I never really thought about that. Y'all really can't walk around at night with headphones on. That's crazy."
I got a little annoyed with them on this one because they were like, Don't y'all realize another woman could still come up from behind you and hit you? Yes, technically she could.
Right, but I could probably beat her ass.
Right. And however, comma, it's probably not going to be no random woman. If a woman is coming up behind me to attack me, we probably got beef.
Hello.
But the fact is, as women, we have to be afraid of so many men. And I was going to say strangers, but then I remembered, nope, not even strangers. Because a majority of the time, it's people that we know.
I was just about to say, statistically, you are more likely to be murdered and attacked by somebody who knows you. Statistically speaking, anyways. Obviously, statistics don't play that much of a role in everyday real life. But if we look at cases historically, you are most likely to be assaulted or murdered or harmed in some way by somebody that you know. You know, the thing that bothers me the most about this case is really the fact that I'm sure even after every man that she ever brought around her children was convicted of some kind of sexual crime, she still feels no sympathy for her children. I don't have anything to back that up. This is pure Devin speculation. This is pure Devin's opinion. But I refuse to believe that you care about your children at all and that you think you did anything wrong, despite the fact that all of the men that you brought around your children ended up being not worth a damn. And honestly, this sparks a interesting conversation that I also saw on TikTok. I do not remember the creator who made this video that I watched. If I can find it, I will put their tag in here or something because I really liked their commentary on it. But it was essentially explaining to men why women with children have such high standards and why they're always on high alert. She's not tripping. She has to make sure you are in a space where you can be around her kids. She's not tripping. So don't get mad at her that she's not allowing you to come back to her house on her first night. She's got kids at her house. She can't do that. She can't live her life like that because she has bigger priorities than you. Her children are her priority. And again, over and over and over again, Denise chose a man over her children. I just don't understand how you do that. Again, I don't have children. I'm not a mother. But quite frankly, I don't have to be. I am so protective of my hypothetical little children. My little children that I see for myself in the next 10 years, those little beings in my head, I am protective as hell over them. Couldn't fathom the idea of putting myself and my relationship over my kids. I'm not going to dive back into Denise too much because I think I've made my feelings on this woman quite clear. So I too am going to move on to the more positive notes of this. I am an artist, if you guys don't know. I've spent a lot of my time drawing, painting. I even do graphic design as a side hustle. And it made me so happy to hear you say that they did this mural in her honor because art speaks to people in a way that I just don't feel like words can. That's why a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I love the care, especially when you do outdoor murals. There's so much care on that. There's so much maintenance. There's no pre-sketch to make sure all the proportions are right or anything like. There's so much care that goes into doing a mural, especially outside. And I love that one, somebody approved of this mural, allowed it to be in their space, and the community supported it, got behind it, and did not allow her death to be in vain despite Denise's best efforts. Despite Denise's best efforts to literally bury her child and have no one talk about it and nobody worry about her because she assumed that nobody cared about her child because she didn't care about her child. And that is where you made the mistake. Because her chosen family cared about her more than you ever could. More than you ever would. And they were going to find her. And they were going to make sure she was okay. And I'm also super happy about the government making strides to protect women. Understanding and acknowledging that there is a discrepancy in the amount of gender-motivated crimes against women. And making sure that perpetrators know that, one, we see you, and two, we will hold you accountable. and we will actually give you more time if we feel that that's what you've done. And I'm appreciative of that. Of course, there's always more work to be done. There's always more fighting to do. But I am always happy with progress, and I always acknowledge progress because we have to start somewhere to keep growing. So as we wrap up today's discussion, we are going to move into our next segment called Today in Crime, where we'll describe a crime or crime-related event that took place on this day. And as we have spent this episode talking about a horrible, terrible parent, it feels right to talk about another horrible, awful, evil parent. As in the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts murdered his pregnant wife, Shannon, and their 2 children, Bella and Celeste. He would go on to bury Shannon in a shallow grave near an oil storage facility and dumped his children's bodies into crude oil tanks. Chris Watts initially maintained his innocence in his family's disappearance, but was arrested on August 15th after confessing to police that he had murdered Shannon. He would later admit to murdering his 2 children, despite initially claiming that he did not.
And that is all the time we will give him because he does not need any more.
Hello. If you found this story interesting, please be sure to leave a clown emoji in the comments.
Any other thoughts, friend?
My final thought. I hope that Ámbar's chosen family is doing well. I hope her community is doing well. But most importantly, I hope her brother is thriving. He was put in such a terrible position also at a young age, and I don't want that to be lost because he is struggling, having to live on with what he knows. And I wish him so much healing, so much love, so much compassion. And I wish the same thing for her chosen family and the community that loved and prioritized her. And that's all I've got, friend.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I would especially like to thank Jackie Flores, the Inter-American Law Review from University of Miami, and El Mostrador for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, please be sure to tell a friend and leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. And feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.